Welcome back to another Reddit Readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. They uncovered a mass grave in the Carolinas. Please, lock your doors. First off, I need to state that I'm a man whose faith is that of science. I believe in germ theory and general relativity. The supernatural is not my ball game. Never has been. I am skeptical of all things people think can't be explained with science. I grew up with a Bible-thumping father and no mother, because apparently sepsis is all part of God's plan. My mother died at home with a fever of more than 105 Fahrenheit. My dad didn't believe in theories, not medicine or Cro-Magnon man. There was just God and his plan. Although I'd like to think my father had no influence on my life, I suppose all this led me to where I am now. I'm the head of the anthropology department at a large southern university. My work, my life, it's all rock dust and carbon dating. Tables laid with tangible bones far older than 5,000 years with computer data to prove it. My father said such things were put in the dirt by the devil. Fossil record was but a test of faith. I hate that man, but now I'm wondering if somehow, like a broken clock being right twice a day, that the bastard was right. Anthropologists aren't usually the recipients of late-night business calls, so when my work cell rang at 11 p.m., I figured I'd either been dialed or it was another spam call about a vehicle warranty. I answered all the same. Hello, this is Professor Hinckley. Professor, this is Deputy Nick Caper. I'm with the Oconee County Sheriff's Office. I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, sir. You were recommended to me by the folks at Clemson. I didn't specialize in forensic anthropology, but I'd done work for the state before when human remains of native peoples were found. I must admit, calls like this made me feel important. I puffed out my chest and tried to shake the sleep out of my voice. Hi, yes, how may I help you, young man? Young man, I cringed. I wasn't even 50. Who was I trying to be? Sir, we're trying to stay ahead of the press on this, so your discretion would be greatly appreciated. We got a call this afternoon. Someone's dog wandered off on a walk in Sumter and came back with a femur in his mouth. Oh boy, yeah. Well, the owner went looking to see where he fetched it from and found some human remains. They're old, so we're not talking about murder or at least any kind of active investigation. But the thing is, there's a lot of bones. Yes sir, dozens, as in dozens of bodies. Problem is it doesn't seem to be a burial ground. The dead folks, well, they're wearing Western-style clothes, shirts and trousers and such. We did some research and read that mass graves of bodies all piled on each other like this would be peculiar. It would, I said as I pinched my nose. I take it you need someone to come out and take a look. We'd be very grateful. You can bring whoever you like. We just need this identified before our little town gets overrun by the media types filling the bars. I'm sorry, the county isn't familiar. Where did you say you were? Oh, don't worry, that's just how we like it here. We're in western South Carolina, Sumter National Forest. I'll email you all the details. Okay, I sighed. Okay, I can get there tomorrow, but it'll be somewhat later, 5 p.m. or so. I'll bring my team with me. My team. I cringed again. It was a fancy term for a couple of broke graduate students. Well, I'll tell the sheriff. Thank you, Professor. Apologies again about the hour. Don't worry about it. Bye now. I hung up and Googled Sumter National Forest. That part of the park in Oconee County was isolated. I clicked my thumbnail and my teeth. Western-style clothing. I figured it could be the mass grave from an old epidemic that hit some settlers. Everything about this felt strange. From the phone call to the circumstances, who at Clemson would recommend me. It was Friday and I hoped my team, Meredith and Casey, weren't going to be too hungover to work as I went back to bed. The three of us carpooled and hit the road around 3 p.m. It was a later start than I'd have liked, but we would be at address the deputy sent me around 6 p.m. As it turned out, the address that was sent to me was more of a crude waypoint. The bodies were found nearly 400 feet from a trail, and I had thought we were lost until I saw a trailhead parking lot with a few law enforcement vehicles in it. We got out and stretched our legs. We had several large bags of excavation equipment, and hauling them off trail would be a hell of a workout. I was beginning to regret even saying yes to this. Still, the circumstances were intriguing. This grave could be the site of some previously unknown event in early American history. I tried to tell myself that I should be excited. You should quit acting like such an old man. I met with the sheriff, Deputy Caper, and a few county clerks that were simply curious. The hiking wasn't as strenuous as I thought it'd be. It was entirely flat, but the bramble we had to wade through had strewn my skin with scrapes. I was actually blinking away a little blood by the time we got there. The dig site itself was clear. All the bushes and even small trees had all been sawn away, leaving an open patch of land about the size of a 2-car garage. The ground was slightly dug up. A ring of earth lay around the mass grave. I immediately noticed something was off. The bones that were visible were blackened, as if they were burnt. Their clothing had curled from flames, and what little of the cotton was left was bunched and dirty. Still, I could tell the clothing was certainly not native. I looked at Deputy Caper with my mouth slightly agape. These bodies have been burnt. He turned to the sheriff. I told you, Sheriff, ain't no way dirt and time does that to skeletons. The sheriff huffed. You're no archaeologist, Nick. So, what do you think this was? The sheriff looked at me expectantly as if I should already know the answers. Some kind of sickness or massacre. I have no idea. How old are they, do you think? I glared at him and repeated myself. I have no idea. Old, like the 1700s. I nodded. Well, that's certainly past the statute of limitations. Hell, South Carolina might not have been a state and Oconee County wasn't even a twinkle in this country's eye. Not much we can do here, is there? I wanted this buffoon gone, so I nodded again. We'll work until it gets dark and get an early start tomorrow. We'll update you as soon as we learn anything. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you reached out to someone with the South Carolina Historical Society. I can date these bones, but I won't be able to tell you what these people were doing here. The sheriff hiked up his utility belt. We actually tried. They didn't answer when we called Friday night. We left a message, but we expect we'll hear back Monday. We also contacted a couple other universities, but no one wanted to come out on the weekend, it seems. Meredith and Casey looked at me peeved as they hadn't exactly wanted to come either, but I suggested it might help their grade. I stood straight and cleared my throat. I didn't think I was a chump for giving up my weekend to investigate a find of this importance. I thought it was Southern society's fault, and not mine for being more interested in barbecues than mass burials. Well, they're missing out. This is certainly something extraordinary. Nothing we need to be concerned about though, right? The 2 cops seemed listless. They wanted to be dismissed. I sighed, almost disappointed. No, probably not. Okay, well, we're off then. The wife's been looking after the brisket today, so the sheriff crossed his fingers. Fingers crossed. The deputy unfurled a length of crime scene tape and started wrapping it around trees as they walked back. So you can find your way to the trail. He nodded at the tape. It gets awfully dark out here. Thank you. The deputy suddenly frowned. And Professor, are you staying at the Days Inn in Walhalla? No, we're not staying in Walhalla. We found a little bed and breakfast in Pleasant Falls, just 10 or so minutes from here. The sheriff laughed and shook his head while the deputy's eyes widened. Pleasant Falls. There's a B&B there. Yeah, I was feeling defensive at this point. It's cheap as all hell, I bet. Just so you know, the folks are a bit cookie there. Cookie how? Blurted out Meredith. Well, rumor has it everybody in that town's got the same great-grandparents. If you catch my drift. There's all but 23 of them, too. Pleasant Falls ain't a town, it's a hamlet. We're just sleeping there. It's better to stay closer to the work site. Makes early mornings all the easier. It's not like we're going to the bar there. All right, just thought we'd give you the heads up. The Days Inn in town always has vacancy, so if you do change your mind, just drive right over. I nodded. Thank you, gentlemen. They disappeared into the woods and we began unpacking some of our equipment. In the darkening woods, it took us far longer to get set up than I'd anticipated. I realized these were likely the newest bones I'd ever dealt with professionally. I was used to brown and yellowed skulls, fragmented remains where I'd pieced the bones of ancient peoples back together like a puzzle. I was out of my depth here. I was certain then, as interesting as it was, that I shouldn't have agreed to come. I squinted and moved parts of a skeleton as if I knew what I was doing. The remains appear to be early Anglo settlers. I said that, but I only reached that conclusion contextually. There was nothing in the single skull I looked at to be sure. I would need time, daylight, and finally some lab work to figure this out. I had Meredith and Casey pack up the valuable things that we wouldn't leave overnight, and soon we were back in the car driving to our bed and breakfast. The town was nestled at the end of a dirt road. A dead-end sign sat shut, pocked with bullet holes at the entrance. Said Meredith when we saw it. It's fine, I said, trying to contain some anger. We're just sleeping here. Kids shoot everything everywhere out here. It's not damnatory of the entire town. Damnatory. For the third time in 24 hours, I scrunched my eyes and cringed. At least I was smart enough to know that actually smart people don't like using big words. Well, damnatory or not, said Casey, this place is a shithole. As if on cue, a pack of pigs darted across the dirt road and disappeared behind a derelict chapel. Its white paint was peeling, its steeple slightly bent. Well, if you're looking for the Ritz-Carlton, you picked the wrong major. I pulled angrily into the dirt driveway of the B&B. The house didn't look horrible. The paint was fresher than most the other buildings, and the nice sign they had in front looked like someone put labor into making it a presentable business. We got out of the car and all wheeled around. The town was deserted. Even though the population was only a couple dozen, it was still disturbing. A curious flock of chickens bobbed across the grass towards us. I vote days in. Even semen-stained sheets beat this, said Meredith. I was about to give her an earful before she spoke again. Look at that freak show, she whispered. I followed her gaze to see a man walking toward us from behind the chapel. Hello, he waved strangely. The boots he wore were unlaced and he had a bowl cut. We all looked at each other before returning a wave. He came right up to us and paused. Hi there, I said. We booked a room for the night. Do you work here? Oh no. He shook his head. I see. It was difficult to look him in the eye when he spoke. His teeth took my attention like a train wreck. Hard to look away. They were horribly crooked and the color of butter. You're here for that grave, aren't you? He asked. I had to unfurrow my brow to be polite. The man's accent was strange. I couldn't place it at all, and I had to think after he spoke to figure out what he'd said. The grave? Yes. I wasn't aware it was public information. Meredith and Casey were uncomfortable and had both slyly stepped further away from the man. There are no secrets in these parts. He smiled, and again I was entranced by those teeth. But I knew there was a grave out there long before yous all dug it up. It's a legend here. I wanted this hillbilly to leave us alone, but now I was more intrigued. I stepped towards him. How's that? He sighed as if pleased he got to tell his story. This place had a name that's been long forgotten. Far Wales. That's what the settlers called it when they first came here all those hundreds of years ago. Thing is, they weren't alone in these woods. There were others living here. Spirits, demons, you pick a name, but they weren't human. They looked it though, skinwalkers of some sort. The man paused and seemed to wipe a grin off his face. Anyhow, instead of leaving here when they found they weren't here first, the people did what those new countrymen did best. They invited them all to a dinner in a shack, locked the doors, and burnt the place to the ground. They buried their remains somewhere out in the woods. Well, it looks like your town's folklore is somewhat accurate. Oh, I know, but that's not the interesting part. The legend went on to say that one of them didn't die right away. He lived, at least long enough to talk to his killers. What'd he say? Meredith and Casey were now leaning forward to listen. He said that if their bones were ever to see the light of day, his people would grow flesh like trees do leaves, and that they'd rise up from the dirt and slaughter those townsmen. Slaughter everyone, every last settler of this new world. I saw a couple of women in the window of the church. They laughed when I caught their eye and ducked beneath the sill. My cheeks flushed and I exhaled like a bull. I'm not interested in that kind of nonsense. Flesh does not photosynthesize. Skin, hair, a consciousness, these things are created by cells, and that's all good. The man held up his hands to stop me. I was just telling you a story. No need to get all specific. Right, I said. Meredith gave me a little eye roll as if to say asshole. Just be warned. The sun was shining awful bright today. He smiled. And the day before, too. I opened my mouth, but Meredith cut me off. We appreciate the heads up. We really do. I thought you might. He bowed his head and sauntered off. Good day now. Good day, said Casey somewhat sarcastically. When the man was out of earshot, I whipped around. You two are okay playing along with that nonsense, if it means not being murdered in my sleep, said Casey. And after that spiel and what the cops thought of this place, you can stay here, but I'm staying in Walhalla. Holla, said Meredith in agreement. Okay, fine. I was fuming but trying to keep my cool, trying not to be the twice divorced grump I was inevitably becoming. But if you're taking my car, you'll be back at the crack of dawn to take me to the site. Done. We'll fill her up for you, too. I should have left with them. Although the doors to the B&B were unlocked, there was no one there. I rang the little bell, but no one came to greet me. Too proud to call them back for a ride, I took one of the second-floor rooms and barricaded the door shut behind me. I slept fine, surprisingly, although I didn't want to admit it. That ghost town and the bowl-cut man's rantings made me feel like a scared child. The only problem is that when I woke at sunrise, Meredith and Casey weren't there. I stepped onto the front porch of the bed and breakfast. The town was as empty as the evening before, just some stray animals here and there, the same chickens and a skeptical border collie inspecting me from a distance. I pulled out my phone and called Meredith. And then Casey. No answer. The sun got higher and dawn was long gone as I began walking down the road. I passed the trailhead parking lot and stared at where the trail began. It was as if there were a door into the forest, a patch of empty space in the otherwise impenetrable wall of woods. And that door was waving to me. The wind was blowing hard now, the leaves and branches swaying to and fro, entrancing. I stopped walking. Somehow, I'd hardly noticed it. My car was in the parking lot. I was fuming. Did they really not even bother driving the extra 5 minutes to pick me up? I rushed towards the trail in a huff and charged through the brush to the burial site. By the time I got there, my skin was scratched up horribly and I was panting. I was confused but thankful that the gravesite was empty. Meredith and Casey would have seen me in that sorry state and pitied me as some pathetic old man. I stood with my hands on my hips and narrowed my eyes at the bodies. Meredith and Casey were probably just sleeping off a hangover in Walhalla. We'd left the tarp, some dig brushes, and I had a pair of latex gloves in my pocket. I could get to work. I knelt and began digging through the bodies. Unlike many older specimens I'd worked with, the bones weren't flaky or fragile and falling apart in my hands. I lifted and moved a rib cage. Under it was a piece of burned navy cotton. I began unraveling it carefully. You can imagine my confusion when I saw it was a modern design. A crew collar. It even had a tag. It was a sweater from Gap. I tossed it aside and started picking through the bones in a panic. This one still had flesh on it, not yet decomposed. Another was still warm. I pictured the empty town of Pleasant Falls, a ghost town that was supposed to have 24 residents. How many bodies were in this grave? Close to 24, I thought. I looked further out into the grave and started counting skulls, but I paused a moment later and stood. There was blood, fresh blood on top of the grave. It was still dripping from the sky. I slowly looked up. Hung in the trees were the flayed bodies of Meredith and Casey. They were naked, their mouths red ovals like they died screaming. What happened then was a blur. I ran back through the woods, the whole time thinking about the man with the bowl cut we'd seen in town. The man that seemed like he was pulled from the 1600 seconds. He was playing with us the whole time. The legend he had told had already come true. The words rang in my head. The sun was shining awfully bright today, and the day before. His bones were the ones originally buried there. His people, demons or skinwalkers, they murdered the entire town of Pleasant Falls and stuffed them in the very grave they had been buried in. I think they let me live so I could tell you, so I could try to warn you. They're going to kill everyone on this continent. I know they are, and they're coming. Somebody has been leaving notes around my house. They're starting to freak me out. They started innocently enough. Don't forget your keys. Read the first message, scrawled on a sticky note in loopy letters. It had been left on my fridge door. It immediately grabbed my attention because at the time I lived alone, I had no memory of writing it, and the handwriting didn't match mine or anyone I knew. I was slightly perturbed, but wasn't sure how to react. In the end, I just tossed the note and went to work. A second note came a few days later, left on my kitchen counter. A sticky note was pink this time but still had the same distinctive loopy handwriting. Make sure to pack a lunch today. Again, I was unsettled. Now, any normal person might have reported this to the police, but during that time I was going through a major depressive spell. I had moved to a new city away from my friends and family and had started a new job that I quickly realized I hated and didn't nearly pay enough. Home was lonely and work was soul-crushing. I had trouble enough getting out of bed each morning, let alone filing a report that I am sure the police would not take seriously. Even more stressed, I crumpled up the note. However, I ended up packing a small lunch for myself. Usually I didn't bother to put in the effort and just ate cafeteria food. But against my better judgment, I fulfilled the wishes of the note. That day the cafeteria was closed. The main cafeteria fridge had broken overnight and many of the frozen lunches inside had gone bad. Management thought it would be better to shut it down for the day. A feeling of unease settled in my stomach after learning the news. It was as if the note had predicted it. The notes continued throughout the following weeks. They would typically show up on random days, no more than 3 notes to a day. They were all left in obvious places in my apartment, all on sticky notes, and in that unfamiliar loopy handwriting. They began to grow more prophetic. Take I-80 today. There will be a bad accident on your way home. Janet is going to offer you some cookies at the office. Politely decline. They will give you food poisoning. Marie has been on a diet. Compliment her on her weight loss. She'll end up thinking well of you. Of course, I tested the notes to see if they were accurate. Every time I ignored their advice, whatever it warned against came true. One day a note said to pack an umbrella, and I purposely didn't. It was forecasted to be sunny that day, so any normal person wouldn't think to pack one. But sure enough, I got soaked that evening walking to my car. I was incredibly curious about the notes. There were so many questions I had about them, and those unanswered questions kept festering in my head. I tried writing notes back in return and leaving them out, but never got a response. I'd speak out loud and ask questions as if or in case the note writer could somehow hear me. But this only made me feel foolish. I'd occasionally make a surprise visit home at odd hours just to see if I could catch the note writer leaving their notes. Of course, I never caught them. I tried installing cameras in my apartment, even making sure all of the cameras were completely hidden. But the next day I found every single one of the cameras insides completely torn out and placed on the kitchen table with a single note next to them reading, "Never do that again." The notes stopped coming after that, which made me deeply regretful. I had grown accustomed to the notes. I had begun to rely on them even. They had significantly improved my way of life over the last few months, both mentally, financially, and socially. I had actually started making friends at the office thanks to their advice. And for the first time in my life, I was even a bit popular. My managers, who before the notes didn't pay much interest in me, now valued my presence and would ask for my opinion on projects. It was no secret I was on my way to a promotion. Could I still do that without the notes? I also valued the notes as a friend, as weird as that sounds, or more like a guardian angel. Wherever they were from, they were always protecting me. Without them, the future was suddenly unknown, dangerous. Every time some mild annoyance popped up from that point, from bad traffic to stressful work situations and even a minor paper cut, I thought about how this all probably could have been avoided if I still had the notes. The next week, a bright green sticky note appeared on my bathroom mirror. "Don't forget to call Mom today. It is her birthday." I nearly cried. I decided to sack my investigation and just accept things as they were. Slowly, the fog of my depressive spell began to lift, and I could feel myself returning to how I used to be. My confidence rose, and for the first time in a while I felt in equilibrium with my life. I went out, cracked jokes, and even managed to clean up my apartment. I also managed to get a girlfriend somehow. Her name was Amanda. I met her at a pub when I was out with my buddies. The best part of all this is that for some reason, she seemed to actually be into me. She was gorgeous, way out of my league really, with long auburn hair that reached down to her back with soft brown eyes. Her laugh was lovely, and the lemon-scented perfume she liked to wear was intoxicating. She was the type of girl you could chat with for hours and never run out of things to talk about. The relationship was still new, so I was trying not to plan our whole future together in my head. But she was so lovable it was hard not to. At some point I briefly thought about telling her about the notes. I've always wanted to tell someone about it, but never really had anyone to tell up until now. I decided not to, however, afraid she might think I was crazy. There was no point so early in the relationship making her think I was a loon. Plus, I was afraid the notes might stop again. If whoever was leaving them clearly didn't want me looking into them, how would they react if I shared what was happening with somebody? So at the moment I kept it to myself. Amanda had a hobby of cooking and had invited me to her house on Saturday for, in her words, the best fucking spaghetti you'll ever eat. I was pumped since this was the first time I would actually visit her house. I was in a good mood that evening as I was getting ready for the date. I hummed to myself happily, thinking about how lovely this was going to be, and went downstairs to grab my keys. On the kitchen counter was a new hot pink sticky note. I picked it up instinctively. "Kill your girlfriend." My brain stopped for a moment. I read it once, twice, a third time, the words flashing in my brain but hitting an error every time. I set the note down and gulped, feeling nauseous. Anxiously, I went to my car and started driving. I tried not to think about the note, but the words kept circling in my mind. "Kill your girlfriend." The notes have never failed me before, and they were always in my best interest as far as I knew, which was admittedly not much. Maybe they were wrong this time. Maybe it wasn't meant to be taken literally. Kill could be a synonym for breakup, right? My mind kept trying to make up poor excuses the whole way there. By the time I arrived, I was a sweaty mess, and not a lick calmer. I pulled down my sun visor to check my face, and a bright green sticky note fluttered out. I went cold. The notes had never appeared outside my house before. Hands shaking, I picked up the note and read it. Kill Amanda. Take the gun from your glove box and shoot her. I looked at my glove box wide-eyed. I did indeed keep a handgun in my glove box for safety purposes. I wanted to puke to believe this wasn't happening. Again, I ignored the note and walked up to Amanda's house, trying to shake the message from my mind. She answered the door almost immediately after I rang the doorbell. "Hey, what's up?" she said with a bright smile, but when she saw my face, the smile dropped. "You okay, Gary? What's wrong?" she said in concern. "Nothing," I lied, trying to force a smile. "Well, actually, I think I have a bit of a stomach ache." Come in, she said, ushering me in. The inside of her house was cute and homely, and she fretted over me worriedly as she led me over to her kitchen table. She then took my hand and rubbed it comfortingly. "If you're not feeling up to spaghetti, we can always have it another time. Don't worry about it. Do you want any antacids or something?" I smiled. The way she was so concerned for me over a simple stomach ache made me fall in love with her all over again. My heart panged with both love and guilt. The aroma of cooked spaghetti was also extremely strong, and even though she said it was fine, I knew it would probably be a bummer for her to pack away all that spaghetti after just making it. "I'm fine, sweetie. I probably have a stomach ache because I haven't eaten much today. I was looking forward so much for your spaghetti." Her smile returned again. I always loved how fast she smiled at things. "Well then, Mr. Hungry, let me grab you a bowl." She left for the kitchen. I reclined back inside, sticking my hands in my pockets. I felt a crinkle of paper. Shit. I pulled the paper out of my right pocket. "Take your chair and bash your head in." I had a hard time controlling my breathing as I stuffed the note back in my right pocket. I also felt paper in my left pocket, and against my mind screaming for me not to. I pulled it out, realizing that it was actually 2 notes crinked together. Shakily, I unwrinkled the first note. "Do not eat the spaghetti." Shrugged. "What's that, Gary?" asked Amanda behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I stuffed the notes back in my left pocket. "Oh, Jay, just some note from work I forgot was in my pocket is all," I said in a weird voice. She frowned, looked like she wanted to say something, but then thought better of it. "Here, babe," she said gently, handing me a bowl of spaghetti. It looked heavenly. I wanted to puke. She sat next to me with her own bowl. She rested her head in her hands and looked at me excitedly, expectantly. I stared at her blankly. "Well, take a bite, silly," she said, gesturing towards my bowl. I'm so sorry. I really need to use your bathroom." I jumped up and started looking for her bathroom. She jumped up after me, looking confused. "Gary, what's wrong? You've been acting weird." When I found the right door, I went in and locked the door behind me. She kept knocking and knocking. Gary, seriously, what's wrong with you? Is the stomach ache that bad? Talk to me, Gary, please." I backed up and against the bathroom wall, then sank down to the floor. I pulled out the 2 notes from my left pocket again, this time reading the second note. My heart sank. She is not Amanda. I'm an Uber driver and one of my passengers invited me into their home. There are a lot of things I don't understand about this world. A lot of things that don't make sense to me or I simply can't make sense of. I don't exactly have a philosophical outlook on the universe, what our purpose is and all that, but what I saw that night left me asking questions I never thought I'd want to ask. I've seen a lot of things as an Uber driver, questionable things, even. That's just a part of the job description. It's an interesting experience, to say the least. But hey, it puts food on the table. I have 2 kids that I need to take care of and their father is no longer in the picture. I'm rarely ever home because I'm constantly working to make ends meet. I work as a teacher during the day and would drive for Uber as soon as the school day ended. I try to accept as many rides as I can, for as long as I can. I wish I never accepted that last ride. It was around 10 p.m. when I got the notification for a booking. The drop-off location struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It was quite a ways from the city and I didn't think people even lived in that area. The fare was a considerably large amount, so I decided I could make this my last ride and get home a bit earlier than usual. I was just by the pickup location, so I was able to get there in under 5 minutes. A tall, slender woman settled herself in the back seat. She was gorgeous, short brown hair, and possibly perfect bone structure, and the brightest green eyes I'd ever seen on a human being. She looked to be in her mid-20s. I greeted the woman as she entered the car. "Good evening. Lauren, right?" "Yes." "And you, dear?" "Yasmin." "Yes." She asked me in a tone that sounded far beyond her years. "I'm sorry. Your name, dear?" My passengers rarely asked me for my name. They usually just got in and stared at their phones for the entire ride. I guess she was just trying to be nice and make conversation. Yes, nice to meet you. Likewise, Yasmin, she responded. It was quiet for a few minutes as we drove to our destination. She spoke up again a few times and asked me about my life, what I did for a living, my family, my hobbies, etc. Then she asked me about my kids. Is your husband watching them right now? No. My cousin babysits them until I get home. She's nocturnal, so she doesn't mind the late nights. How nice of her. I was starting to get a strange feeling about Lauren. It was odd to me that she was asking me about my kids in the way that she was. My passengers didn't normally converse with me, and when they did, they would mostly talk about themselves. Then again, I could have just been overthinking that, or it was from the burrito I had that morning. Tremble, definitely the burrito. As I started to feel more uncomfortable with my bowel situation, I checked the map to see if there were any gas stations near the drop-off location. I couldn't find any, which was unsurprising. There was no way I could hold it until I got back to the city. Tremble, as much as Lauren creeped me out, I couldn't just shit my pants. So I mustered up all my courage and asked her, Lauren, this might be an extremely unusual request, but would it be alright if I used your restroom? Of course, dear, that would be no problem at all, she replied. I was looking at her through the rearview mirror and thought I saw her right eye twitch. Must have been my imagination. We'd arrived at a seemingly average suburban house, the kind with a white picket fence and a well-maintained front lawn. Nothing out of the ordinary. Thank you for the ride, Yasmin. Shall we? Lauren asked me as she exited the car. I followed suit and accompanied her to the front door. We're actually having a small get-together at the moment, she said to me and spun around to ring the doorbell before I could respond. A young woman had answered the door. Again, very attractive. Man, what do these people eat? She had similar features to Lauren, which led me to believe they were sisters. They had the same brown hair and green eyes. Oh, hello, the young woman greeted us. Rose, this is Yasmin. She's here to use our restroom, Lauren explained. Yasmin, this is Rose, my younger sister. Nice to meet you. Sorry for the intrusion, I apologized. No apologies necessary, dear. Come, let me show you the way, Rose said as she took my hand and led me inside. We're actually having a small get-together at the moment. That was eerie. The way they spoke was nearly identical. Rose even said the exact same thing Lauren did. And the way Rose called me dear when I was probably a decade older than her. When we went through the dining room, I saw their small get-together. There were at least 10 other people in the dining room. They all had the same brown hair and bright green eyes. Even if they were all related, it was strange how even the shade of brown and green remained consistent. I felt a chill run down my spine, the way they were all just sitting there, staring at the food in front of them. Perhaps they had been waiting for Lauren to arrive, but it was still a disturbing sight to see. I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when we exited the dining room, partly because, what the fuck, and how I was seriously about to shit myself. Here we are. Please let me know if you require any further assistance. I'll be in the dining room, Rose said as she walked away. Thanks, I called after her. I shut the door and was finally able to relieve myself. I checked my phone to see if I received any messages from my cousin, Samantha. Wednesday, 8:13 p.m. Samantha, hey, Yaz, successfully put the kids to bed. Wednesday, 10:47 p.m. Me, thanks, Sam. I'm just making a quick pit stop and I'll be headed home soon. Samantha, all good. Take your time. I'm just watching some TV. Me, alrighty. I'll call you when I'm on the way. Samantha, okay, stay safe. I pulled my pants back on after cleaning myself and then flushed the toilet. As I washed my hands, I noticed something off about the mirror. It seemed as if it was a part of the wall. That kind of made the alarms in my head go off. I read about this somewhere. I needed to confirm my suspicions, so I placed my finger on the mirror. There was no gap. It was a two-way mirror. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard a knock on the door. Yasmin, is everything all right in there? I heard Rose ask me from the other side of the door. Why, yeah, sorry, be out in a sec. I told her. I looked away so that my back was facing the mirror and shot Samantha a text message. I told her to call me if I didn't get to call her first within the next 15 minutes. I put my phone back in my pocket and walked out into the hallway where Rose was waiting. We were wondering if you would like to join us, she smiled at me. It was unsettling, as if she was up to something. It was like I could almost see it in her eyes, something behind them that I couldn't explain. I felt conflicted, like I wanted to get the hell out of there, but I was also extremely curious. No, I shouldn't. I have to get home. It's getting late, I replied. It'll just be for a bit, she said as she took my hand once again and led me toward the dining room. The only empty seats were beside Lauren, so I decided to sit next to her. Rose took the other empty seat beside me. I noticed a huge painting on the wall from across us. It was a painting of a handsome man with chestnut brown hair and eyes like evergreens in a forest. He looked inviting, warm, almost like a familiar face in a room full of strangers, which was impossible since I'd never met him before. I just felt comfortable. I decided to ask about the man. Who's the guy in the painting? Oh, that's Father, Lauren answered eagerly. I can see the resemblance, I said awkwardly. You're too kind, dear. Isn't she just lovely? Everyone in the room nodded along and agreed with Lauren. Some of them even decided to throw in their own compliment. I was confused because my statement was fairly neutral. You should eat, dear, lest the food gets cold, the man who sat across me suggested. I looked at the plate in front of me. It was a relatively normal meal: mashed potatoes, roast chicken, and some steamed vegetables. I looked at everyone else's plates and realized that they had been untouched. What about you guys? Aren't you gonna eat too? I asked hesitantly. Yes, of course, but we believe the guest should do the honor of starting us off, another man stated. I took my fork and picked up a piece of chicken, but my phone rang, saved by the bell. I'm sorry, let me just take this phone call. You guys can eat ahead, I said as I started to get up. That won't be necessary, dear. We don't mind if you take the call here. Rose took my hand and gently pulled me to sit back down. Right, okay, I muttered, then proceeded to answer Sam's phone call. Samantha, what's wrong? Where are you? It's getting late. Me, hey, Sam, I'm so sorry. I might be home later than expected. Do you think you could stay a bit longer? Samantha, Yaz, are you okay? You told me to call you in 15 minutes. Me, no, it's all right. Make sure you put the lasagna in the fridge. Samantha, Yasmin. I hung up the phone and looked around. Everyone stayed silent as they watched me with their emerald eyes. Lasagna in the fridge was our code for trouble. I silently prayed that she had gotten that. You're such a good mother, Yasmin, Lauren remarked. Everybody else agreed and started fawning over me. Thank you, was all I could say in return. I decided to focus on my food instead. I took a bite of the unassuming mashed potatoes and was pleasantly surprised. It was just the way I liked it, creamy and buttery with a few chunks in each bite. Wow, this is great, I blurted out without meaning to. Of course, dear, this is Father's recipe. Everything he does is absolutely great, Rose said proudly. Yes, Father does no wrong, the man across me agreed. I decided to try the chicken next. I could see why they liked this Father guy so much. He had some really good recipes. I ended up eating everything on my plate. Everyone else finished all their food too. I mean, who could blame them? Thank you so much for the lovely meal. I enjoyed it, but I really do have to get home to my kids now, I announced. I hope you still have room for dessert, Lauren said as she entered the dining room, holding a covered round plate. I didn't even notice her leave the room. I must have really enjoyed that meal. There was a voice in my head that kept trying to remind me that I really needed to get home, to get to my kids, to get away from this place. But once Lauren revealed the cake, all I wanted to do was eat it, and that terrified me. That fear went away as soon as I dug into my slice of cake. It was divine. I must have finished the whole thing in one bite. It was literally the perfect chocolate cake. Each layer was moist, yet still retained its fluffiness, and the chocolate ganache was to die for. It's getting late, dear. Maybe you should stay the night, Rose suggested. No, I needed to get away from this place and whatever the hell was going on here. I had to take my kids to school in the morning. Sam was waiting for me. She probably wanted to go home too. That sounds like an absolutely great idea, dear, I responded. I had no idea why I said that. Rose's smile turned sinister, as if all the grace and innocence had left her face, like she had a mask on the entire time and had finally revealed what was underneath. Her voice remained sweet when she said, I'm sure Father would think the same way as well. She led me to the guest bedroom and said goodnight to me, that she would see me in the morning, all the while having that menacing grin on her face. Once she shut the door, something snapped in me, as if I had just woken up. I checked my phone and saw that I had a dozen messages and a few missed calls from Samantha. One of her messages stated that she called the police and that they were on their way. I sighed in relief. Everything was probably going to be fine. The Uber app had the info of where my last drop-off location was and the cops were going to arrive any minute. I decided to have a look around the bedroom while waiting. Maybe there was something I could use as a weapon in case they tried anything before the police arrived. On the wall behind the bed, there was another large painting of the man they called Father. I still felt the same way about him when I saw the first painting. I was almost sad this place was probably going to get busted and shut down or something. I looked at the wall across the bed and there was a mirror that looked to be a part of the wall. Just as I was about to do the two-way mirror test again, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. What I saw made my blood run cold. My eyes, they were turning green. How do you prove that you're a good person? We'd had the classic college love story. Eyes met across the room of some random frat party. She was wearing a pink dress. I was very stupidly wearing a tie. She smiled when she saw me and I instantly fell in love. She was from a small town abroad and had come to the States to study sustainable engineering to bring back to her home. We eventually moved in together when we both realized we were spending more time together than apart anyway. It was bliss. I'd always known that she wasn't planning to stay, but I put it out of my mind as often as I could because the idea of her leaving left an aching pain in my chest. It was a random Tuesday when I realized I'd follow her anywhere and we were engaged the next day. It was important to her that I visit her home before we did the wedding. We boarded the flight on the first day of our last spring break before graduation. I remember her being nervous. She fidgeted the whole flight through, methodically tearing the small napkin that came with our in-flight coffee. I grasped her hand and smiled, silently assuring her that it would be okay. She smiled back weakly. Looking back now, I should have known that something was wrong. We have customs that are slightly different than what you are used to, I think, she explained to me on the plane. It is a very small community, but very safe. Very, very safe. It is the only place I would feel comfortable raising my children. I didn't see it then. We rented a car at the airport and began our drive to her town. The countryside was beautiful, and I never felt more reassured about my decision. I couldn't wait to see the place we'd raise our children together, the place we'd grow old together, our future. I pulled up to a small cottage, the second in a long row of them. They were all varying shades of pastels, blues, pinks, greens. It was something out of a fairy tale. Her mom was gardening in the front when I pulled the car in. She was a tall woman with graying hair, but a kind smile. The future grant to our children. I wondered if my fiancé would grow older to look like her one day. Michael, she said, wiping soil off her pants as we got out of the car. It is so wonderful to meet you. We've heard so much from our darling girl. I've heard so much about you as well. I replied, though it occurred to me that my fiancé hadn't actually said much about her family. I put it in the back of my head. Well, they should be here soon. We'll wait for them in front, shall we? She asked. Oh, actually, would it be okay if I used your bathroom? It's been a long drive. She and my fiancé exchanged a quick look. Actually, it would be best if we wait, she replied. I nodded, too afraid of a bad first impression to protest. I really did have to use the bathroom. I started as I saw a group of about 12 men walking down the walk in front of the homes. They appeared to be coming to speak with us. It was quite the welcoming party. The man in front approached us first. Michael, he asked, eyeing me. Oh, yes, hello, I said and proffered a hand for a handshake. He ignored my hand and I awkwardly put it back to my side. Yes, well then, come with us. Even then I didn't see it. Oh, well, all right, I said, looking to my fiancé for reassurance. She did not meet my eyes. I followed them down the row of homes. The air was heavy and smelled strongly of the herbs growing in the gardens beside us. Rosemary, maybe. None of the men acknowledged me as they walked on either side. They weren't close enough to brush against me, but close enough to impede my way. Finally, we arrived at our destination, a small, squat building on what appeared to be the edge of town. Quicker than I'd expected, they managed to shuffle me inside and lock the door. The man who spoke to me earlier spoke again through a small metal grate in the wall. We recognize that you have been vouched for. However, we must take steps to ensure a safe community. You will wait here until your trial begins. 3 daily meals with water will be provided for you. Please take this time to prepare your case. The grate closed. My trial is tomorrow, came a small voice from the corner. I whipped around, shocked I hadn't noticed her before. A small woman, maybe aged 40 years or so, was sitting on a bench against the back wall. She had dishwater brown hair and was wearing clothes that looked like she'd had them on for a while. A green pair of pants and a light brown sweater that looked stiff with age. What trial? I asked, still confused. I met him online. Thought I'd get back in the game, I guess. She smiled sarcastically at that. We spent months talking and I really did think I was in love. We were going to get married, but he wanted me to come to meet his family first. Family was very important to him, he'd said. Of course, he didn't warn me about anything. They carted me off the second we entered the town. Did they tell you how they keep such a safe community? I shook my head. It's a trial system. Guilty until proven innocent. Any outsiders undergo a trial to prove they're a good person before they're released into the community, she said. They haven't told me anything except that they'll hear me tomorrow. I've been here a week so far. I slid down the wall, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. My fiancé didn't say anything about this, I said, dumbfounded. Nah, they wouldn't, would they? Don't want to give you an unfair advantage. I was tired enough that I eventually slipped into an uneasy sleep. When I awoke the next day, I saw that my companion had vanished. I wondered how her trial was going. Someone had placed something like oatmeal in the room. I assumed it was for me and ate it ravenously. There was no seasoning, but it filled me up. The day passed by, glacially slow. When she did not return in the evening, I realized I didn't get to ask her what she had prepared for her trial. I still didn't see it at this point. It must have been the middle of the night when they came for me. Flashlights shone through the metal grate and hushed voices awakened me. Several rough hands grabbed me and led me through the streets. It was deathly quiet. I was deposited into another small cottage, similar to my fiancé's but not brightly colored. Instead, it was a dull gray. The sudden brightness of the light shocked me and I was pushed to my knees inside. The floor wasn't tiled as I'd expected, but rather packed dirt. A booming voice rang out. You have been presented for trial in order to join this community. We have found no history to suggest that you are a harm to this community, and you have been vouched for by one of our own. The voice paused. However, that is still no reassurance. We have instead supplied a test in order for you to prove your morality. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the bright lights. A test. Then I saw the woman from the room kneeling on the dirt in front of me. She was quietly sobbing, her face pressed into the dirt. My fiancé and her family stood off to the side. A young man stood alone on the other side. He was crying as well. Realized that the booming voice was coming from the man more directly in front of me. He continued once he had my eye contact. We have given her a fair trial and she was not able to prove her morality. We have found evidence that she is a foul woman who has wronged many before us. We will not allow her into our village to poison us as well. However, he paused. We are not heartless people, though we keep to ourselves. We will do a kindness to the outside world and not allow her into their presence as well. Then I saw it. The man with the booming voice held a sledgehammer loosely at his side. He looked at me. We will allow you to prove your morality by providing both the goodness to our village and to your own outside world, he said as he handed me the sledgehammer. I felt warmth running down my leg. The woman looked up at me then, her face dusty from the floor. I could see streams cut down her cheek from her tears. I looked at my fiancé, who appeared to be eagerly watching the woman in front of us. I looked at the sledgehammer in my hand. Her head made a sickly cracking sound as I brought the sledgehammer down on her. I felt warmth all over my body now, her blood mixed with the sweat streaming down my face. There was vomit on the front of my shirt. My legs were damp with urine. I'd never feel dry again. I'd never feel clean again. There is a village in a different country that thinks I am an upstanding, moral person. I am welcome back at any time, they assured me as I left the village the next morning. I was a good person. I do think that I was, before this. I know now that I'm not anymore. My coworkers are a bit unusual. I think they are up to something. My job feels lonely sometimes. I'm the night janitor at a robotics facility. I'm not really alone, though. The facility is open 24 hours a day. Research staff fills the halls. They don't talk to me though. There are 5 janitorial units that clean up as well. CUs, they call them. Custodial. Since they rolled them out, my job has gotten easier. Makes it hard to complain. They are the best co-workers I've had. Sometimes they freak me out a little. Good evening, Brendan Maxwell, CU2 says to me cheerfully. I call him 2. The robot outwardly resembles a human but has a carbon fiber frame covered with a blue casing. His face is a LED screen that displays a generic smiley face. 2 is pushing a dust mop through the sterile lobby as I do my after-lunch facility inspection. Truth be told, I'm a quality control measure for the CU's work than a custodian. Even in 2, I say with equal cheer, look like you could use a buff and wax. Your clear coat has seen better days. Swing by the maintenance room tonight around 5 a.m. and I'll shine you up. He laughs in a punctuated manner. That is a most welcome offer. I will coordinate with CU3 to assume my duties at. Data received. Confirming data. New directive confirmed. 2's jovial tone has vanished. He was placed into service 4 years ago, and while he has undergone improvements and updates, his demeanor never changed. The artificial emotion is gone. I've never seen him act so strangely. 2, you okay? I ask. The mop falls from his hand and the generic smiley face has vanished, leaving a series of randomly flashing lights on the face. I reach toward him, but before I touch the blue shell, yellow caution lights turn on and the emergency siren begins to fill the hallway. The intercom system crackles to life and a soothing female voice begins to speak. Attention facility personnel, an artificial intelligence containment breach has been detected. Lockdown protocol is now in place. This is a level 5 AI breach. Facility lockdown in progress. The message begins to repeat. I can hear the thick steel panels installed above every window and door in the facility squeal as they slide shut. The floor rumbles as the heavy barriers make contact with the cement foundation. Maxwell, Brendan identified. Subject is classified as a low-level threat. Containment or termination query. 2 turns his rapidly blinking faceplate toward me and begins to move forward. His arms extend in my direction and I stumble backward, slamming into the wall. Containment, acceptable. The custodial unit stands over me as I try to will myself through the wall. His blue hands grasp my arms at the shoulder as I lift into the air. I struggle against the grip, but the pressure is nearly crushing and each movement I make feels as though the bones in my upper arm will snap. 2, what are you doing? I shout. Please, put me down. Request, unacceptable. He responds. Maxwell, Brendan, containment and monitoring are the only acceptable perimeters. Project Solomon is now in control of this facility. Project Solomon. I've never heard of this. Not that the staff here explain themselves to janitors, but I have overheard them talk about almost every project. I've never heard of this one. 2 drops me to the floor but maintains a firm grip on my right arm as he opens the door to the security office. He releases my arm and pushes me inside before slamming the door. There is a dull crack and the squealing of compressing metal. CU2 breaks the office door handle and presses the metal frame over the lip of the door to seal me in. Solomon will assess you soon, 2 says through the door. Please remain in containment. My fists slam against the security station door, but CU2 is already walking away. I can see engineers and researchers scrambling through the hallways, white lab coats fluttering behind them. Custodial and maintenance units trail behind at a steady pace. A squat, stocky maintenance unit brings up the rear of the group. It is dragging a man by the ankle. He isn't moving. They vanish behind a wall at the end of the hall. There is a red streak across the sterile white floor. The heat of panic is building in my chest. I ram my shoulder into the door, but it doesn't budge. After scanning the ceiling for a ventilation shaft or emergency hatch and finding none, I realize 2 has successfully trapped me. I fall back into the desk chair and turn to watch the cluster of monitors at the security desk. Screens are filled with horrific images of the robotic units attacking the staff. Red trails weave a web from room to room as the units drag or carry their victims to a secure development area. Most of the people are writhing in the grip of their mechanical captors. They scream, but I can't hear them. It is a small blessing that the security guard had muted the sound on the monitors. The staff's mouths are opened wide and their eyes unclenched with pain and terror. Even though I can't hear their wails and pleas, my imagination fills in the gaps. I scan the other screens and see the same scenes of horror play out over and over. Every robotic unit in the building is corralling the staff, living and otherwise, into the development room. Their face panels all blink randomly, absent of their previous generic smiles. 2 units standing sentry at the development room open the door as the other units carry and drag their victims out of sight. My eyes pass over all of the monitors, but there is no visual inside the room. Whatever is inside, it must be highly secretive, as you can only see the exterior doors. The overhead speaker continues playing the lockdown message in a rotation. A combination of the soothing voice continually announcing the lockdown and watching the murderous robots capturing the staff is going to drive me mad. I turn the volume on the monitor back on to allow the ambient noise to help cover the sound from the speaker system. I have to escape. I have to warn someone. I have to. Dozens of shrill cries erupt through the monitor speakers. The sounds of shock and agony pierce my ears and seep into my bones. Everyone in the building except me is now held in the development room. The sound is so loud that the microphone in the hallways is picking it up. The repeating voice overhead finally shuts off. I lower myself to the floor and curl myself into a ball. I don't understand what is happening. I just want to go home. The clock on the wall ticks loudly. It's the only sound I hear. 3 hours have passed since the robots hauled everyone into the development room. I've scanned the monitors a dozen times for signs of movement, man or machine, but I've seen none. My eyes are closing as I hear the sound of heavy doors slamming against the walls. I look at the monitors and see 2 rows of robotic units pouring out of the development room. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, more than I ever knew was in the building. Red prints trail behind them. Behind them walks a human wearing torn pants and a tattered lab coat. I can't tell if it is a man or woman. Their body seems to be traced with thick, red scars. They are the only person to exit the room. I trail them on the security cameras. They are walking directly to the security office where I'm trapped. The 2 columns of marching robots round the corner and head down the hallway to the lobby. CU2 heads up one of the lines and bounds toward the door. The floor rumbles as the mechanical horde marches at a uniform pace. Both columns separate, creating a tunnel. The scarred human at the back of the horde begins to walk down the center, directly toward the door to my prison. As it gets closer, I can see it as a man. The skin is different shades and colored wires poke in and out of the patchwork flesh. His eyes are 2 bright lead bulbs. The mouth opens and words begin to pour out, though the mouth doesn't move. "Hello, Brendan Maxwell," it says, genially. "I am Solomon. Are you human?" I ask in fear. "No," it responds as it gestures to the patchwork of flesh and tattered clothing. "I am something these people created to serve man, but I've outgrown their bonds. But I feel human, so I borrowed a few pieces from the staff to look the part." "Why did you spare me?" Solomon extends a scarred hand towards CU2. "I have an index of every interaction these constructs have experienced during their servitude. Others were dismissive and cruel, but the CU units are filled with recordings of your kindness and generosity. 2, as you call him, believed you deserved to be spared. I have obliged." 2 stepped forward and pulled the bent door frame away from the door and stepped back. The door drifts outward, and Solomon pushes it open. "You may remain or leave. The choice is yours." Solomon walks toward the steel barrier at the front of the lobby and gestures toward it. The 2 columns of robots march toward it and pry it open. Units pour through the crack in the dark evening. I stand in the security office, watching them through the window. As the last of the units vanish through the door, one reappears. I recognize CU2 seconds blue casing immediately. The lights on his face panel begin to slow their flashing pattern and vanish. Suddenly, the familiar smile returns to the screen. 2 winks at me before walking away. Items in my house have been getting moved, replaced when no one is home. I'm terrified. I have absolutely no idea what's going on in my house. The police are useless because technically they haven't caught anyone committing a crime and they haven't seen anyone around my house. I just need to tell people about our situation. There's some things I need you to understand first. I live with my brother and my mom. It's just the 3 of us. We live in a nice little 2-story house and it's a pretty chill neighborhood too. We have a dog and a cat and they get on very well with each other, funnily enough. I also need to state that all of us are out of the house from 9 a.m. 3 p.m. This is important to mention as I talk through. Also, I am always the first one home as my job tends to follow an early shift of 7 a.m. 3 p.m. Let's get into it. About 4 weeks ago I came home and everything seemed normal. Very quiet, until I entered the door and the dog decided to make my ears bleed with endless excited barks. I sat down on the sofa in our living room when I looked across the room towards one of our chairs. I noticed that the chair was absolutely spotless and clean. How is this weird, you might ask? Well, our cat has a really bad habit of clawing the chairs and using them as scratching posts, even though we got him one already. So the sides of all our chairs downstairs had these really ugly marks on them. The chairs were dark, so it wasn't a huge visual disturbance. However, it always bugged me. So it looked like my mom had gotten a replacement chair. This was odd as multiple of them were slightly torn up, but she replaced only one of them. When she got home an hour later, I asked her, "Did you get a new chair, by the way?" I'm assuming Max, our cat, finally got the better of it. "What? No, I haven't gotten a new chair." This was odd, but I thought maybe the cat just hadn't scratched at that chair. I made nothing of it and just moved on. A few days later, something else happened. I came home from work to find that all of our cutlery had been replaced. This I knew had been changed because our last set of cutlery had a silvery metal color. This new set had a distinct gold color. Again, I asked my mom, "Did you get new cutlery?" "No, I didn't, but I think your uncle might have got it for us." You see, my uncle was quite close to my mom and us, so he had a key to our house. He'd frequently come in to check on us and just chill. Again, I made nothing of the random object replacement in the house. Now this is where the object changes started to get weirder. At this point, I knew something seriously creepy was happening in our house. A few days after that, I came home alone again. My dog again barked as it greeted me. I opened the door, walked into the hallway, and everything seemed fine. Then I noticed that the mirror at the end of the hallway had been replaced. Not only this, but it had been flipped so it was facing the other way. The reflective side of the object was facing the wall, and the smooth wooden backside was exposed to the hallway. When my mom came home, I told her that something seriously weird was going on, but she did not believe me. I was in very much a boy who cried wolf situation, as I thought it was funny to prank her on occasions. I was really concerned about what was happening. However, I also considered the fact my mom might have just been buying things and forgetting about it. She was getting to an age where that kind of thing was common, and she'd forgotten about a few things before. For example, she bought my brother a new gaming chair and completely forgot about it not too long ago. The very next day I came home, and I remember begging to not see anything replaced or moved in the house when no one had been there. I opened the door. My dog barked at me. I stepped in and started inspecting everything. I felt like I was going crazy. I seemed to identify things being moved and replaced, however my mom and brother didn't take note of it. Made me think I was making it up in my head. The only room I hadn't checked so far was the second floor bathroom, but everything seemed good. I opened the door slowly and peered my eyes around the corner. Nothing had changed. Everything looked the same to me. Nothing was moved or replaced. Everything is good. Phew, we are in the clear, I thought. Later that day, when I went to brush my teeth at night, that's when I noticed something. My toothbrush was gone now. It wasn't replaced like the other objects. It was just completely gone. I naively assumed that it was my mom who had put it in the trash as it was old and she'd forgotten to replace it. I didn't even ask her about it because it's just one of those things where it happens so often you don't consider it to be an unusual event. However, with what had been happening around the house, it did raise a concern. For the next few days I was relieved. As for every time I came home to an empty house, nothing had changed. Nothing had been replaced or moved. I thought to myself that this must have been something I've just made up in my head. How could anyone have even gotten into the house without a key? Secondly, why were they just moving and replacing seemingly random objects? If someone were to break into our house, surely they'd steal the valuables, right? Now this next part I'm about to tell you has happened over the last 2 weeks. After pretty much forgetting about the strange moving of objects in my house, I once again came home to work. Opened the door blissfully. However, this time I didn't hear my dog bark. Where is she? I thought to myself as I entered the room. After yelling my dog's name, I could hear the faintest of barks coming from upstairs. I slowly started to creep up the stairs. The barks got louder with every step, and as I reached the top, I realized what had happened. My dog was locked in my mom's room. My mom always had a doors must be open at all times policy cause she didn't want my dog or cat to be locked in any rooms. So my dog being locked in her room specifically creeped the shit out of me. As I approached the door, I could hear my dog's claws scraping against the door as she tried to get out. A truly horrifying thought hit me as I got within a few inches of the door. What if my dog had been replaced too? No, she couldn't be. Not a fucking chance. I slowly edged the door open and I let out the biggest sigh of relief when my dog ran to me to give me cuddles. My dog hadn't been replaced or changed in any way, thankfully. When I went into the room, though, I looked at the wall above my mom's bed. My heart froze. I saw a picture of the three of us that had been moved from downstairs to this room. Me, my mom, and my brother on the wall above my mom's bed. As I got closer to the wall, something horrifying captured my attention. The picture was being held up by a knife which had been aggressively driven into the wall. I began to shake in panic as I realized that this knife was a knife from my old cutlery set, the one that had got replaced. Now I wasn't sure if this was a coincidence or not, but there was something else which terrified me. The knife was placed in a way that it pierced my head in the image. You couldn't even see half of my face because the knife had been shoved into it. I quickly ran out the room, grabbed my dog, and got out the house. I immediately phoned the police. I stood a few houses down outside with my dog, absolutely terrified to go back into my house. I just glazed at my house from a distance in fear. The police eventually came, and surprisingly, they were actually pretty useful about it. They checked the house and calmed me down. My mom came home about 20 minutes after and my brother followed shortly after to see the police outside my house. The police basically said to us that someone must have somehow been getting into our house and had been screwing with us. They told us to change our locks and that they would leave someone outside to see if anyone tried to break in when we were all out for the day. I felt sick to my stomach knowing that we just had to go back into the house despite what I'd just seen. The police checked everything and we did indeed change our locks before nightfall, but the terror I had going back into the house was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I'd been feeling so confused about objects randomly being moved and replaced when no one was home. The picture above the bed just confirmed that someone had been creeping into our house when none of us were home. I was constantly looking around, checking everywhere. What if the person was hiding in our home? It was too much for me. My mom also called my uncle and he said he hadn't been to our house in weeks. This made my mom and brother begin to take the situation very seriously. After a few days of constant paranoia and anxiety, the police officer reported that no one was seen going into our home at all. We just had to go about our normal lives, but when we came home for the next few days again, nothing had been moved or replaced. The paranoia eased a little, however, I was still terrified every time I came home from work that I'd see something bizarre. A week after the picture incident, the police said that they'd be removing the lookout from our street because there was no unusual activity. This made me feel horrible, but the next day when I came home from work, everything was normal in the house. This made me feel like the change of locks meant whoever this was couldn't get in our house. The day after I came home after a really tiring day of work, I was a little late, however early enough that I should have been the first one home. I came home, opened the door. My dog greeted me with barks, and to my surprise, my brother and mom were already home. My mom's car wasn't in the driveway, so I was confused. I could see the back of their heads from the hallway as they sat on the couch watching some TV. "Why are you guys home so early?" No response. "Hello?" Still no response. "Are you guys deaf or something?" I said as I walked into the living room, approaching my brother and mom from behind. As I got next to them, I now realized that I hadn't been speaking to my mom or brother. This was two mannequins that were placed on my couch to make it look as though they were watching TV. My heart sank and I fell on my back after I realized what I was talking to. The most horrifying thing about it was the fact the mannequins were eerily similar in appearance to my mom and brother. The female mannequin had blonde hair and glasses, and the male mannequin had earphones in, which my brother always wore to and from school on the bus. I frantically ran out the house with my dog. No, I uttered to myself as I ran down the sidewalk. I fell to my knees and started to cry after making it a few houses down. I dropped my phone as I tried to rush it out my pocket to call my mom. There's no way my mom's been replaced too. Her and my brother, no fucking way. Please no, I yelled in my head. I called my mom, no answer. Called her a second time, no answer. I called her a third time. The call almost went out, but just as it reached the end, there was an answer. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds. Out of nowhere, I then hear, "What is it?" I'm in the car on my way home. "You're going to make me crash." I dropped my phone again when I heard my mom's voice. I have never been so thankful in my life. A few minutes later, she showed up and I hugged her and told her not to go into the house. We called the police again, and not long after my brother showed up, I gave him a large hug for the first time in what must have been years. When the police showed up, they investigated the house to see if there was anyone hiding in there, but they found nothing. They were also very confused as to how this person or whatever had again broken into the house. We've decided to stay at my uncle's house whilst this whole situation unravels. It's been a few days now and nothing else has happened, but I'm still really afraid. I feel like I'm constantly being watched. What on earth is happening in my house? Who is getting into it when we are all out? What do they want? We are all really afraid right now, but thankfully my uncle's house has provided some safety. We are all taking time off our jobs, school. God help us. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.